I make harpsichords, I would say. If they were listening, the eyes of my fellow partygoers would light up to be given this unexpected chance to add a rare bird, a vagrant species to their life list. And I would think to myself, I am about to have a problem getting out of this conversation gracefully. For despite the fact that harpsichords are real, most people have a better understanding of unicorns and hippogriffs.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Steve Guerrero and I'm the Director of Education here at the Charles River Museum of Industry and Innovation. I'm really excited to see you all here and I'm especially excited for tonight's presentation. So without further ado, I want to introduce somebody that I've come to know over the last few months. Many of you have known a lot longer than that. And I want to just give you a quick story that some of you may already know, but when I first started working here last year, I was familiarizing myself with the mill complex and its history, and I came across a 1980s map of the mill complex by our founder, Michael Folsom, from around 1981. And that copy of the map is in the exhibit, and you'll see it has all of the mill buildings, and the center is labeled Cotton Picker Building, where they would clean and brush the cotton for preparation of textile making. And in parentheses, someone had handwritten Harpsichord Factory. And everyone I asked in this building, I don't know what that is, because it just seems too good to be true. I fell down a rabbit hole, got in touch with Hendrik, especially even after I got in touch with Hendrik, people would be like, well, did you talk to Hendrik? Yes. And so it's been so much fun to learn about this wonderful community, this long-standing community that helped to revive early music in the Boston area through the hard work of the harpsichord builders and their skill and artisanship, which has been inspirational to see in real time with our exhibit. Without further ado, I would love to introduce Hendrik for tonight's talk, Henrik Broekman.
Good evening. The easy answer to the question, no doubt, that you've been asking yourself for the past several minutes is, why not? Why not make harpsichords? I have structured this talk about harpsichords around, wait for it, the cocktail party. Why? I first set foot in a harpsichord shop in 1965. Way back then, as a student in the music student bubble, everybody I knew what I was proposing to get myself into, and social interaction was greased and easy. But 7 years later, when my new wife and I moved away to the real world in Hanover, New Hampshire, the bubble burst, and I was introduced to department cocktail parties. I didn't have a great deal in common with her fellow physicians or their wives, mostly wives. When I was asked what my medical specialty was, it amused me to call myself a staff spouse. But I found I could have a pleasant, easygoing conversation as long as I could keep it confined mainly to the three safe topics for 20-somethings: dogs, gardens, and kids. We didn't have any, but that was no matter. It was fascinating to talk to someone who did. But things went downhill fast when I would be asked, I make harpsichords, I would say. If they were listening, the eyes of my fellow partygoers would light up to be given this unexpected chance to add a rare bird, a vagrant species to their life list. And I would think to myself, I am about to have a problem getting out of this conversation gracefully. For despite the fact that harpsichords are real, most people have a better understanding of unicorns and hippogriffs. To paraphrase Kermit the Frog, it's not easy being different. Being a fellow with an easily mispronounced name, making something very few people can imagine ever needing, does put some sport in the game. Nevertheless, let the games begin. One typical opening sally is, well, the truthful answer would necessitate telling my whole life story to date. That didn't go well. I settled happily on one of the great movie lines. It's adequately truthy, and it's more succinct and far more entertaining. But what does harpsichord making mean to the person I'm talking to? Are they fascinated by me and my idiocy, or my product and its exoticism? What issues do I need to address to really satisfy my fellow partygoers' interest? Are they thinking, help me out here. I know I've heard of them, but I have no clue how to go ahead with this conversation. Or are they thinking, what's the strange fascination here? What's the voodoo that you do, presumably well? Or perhaps, he should get a real job. Still, he's off the streets and out of mischief. But often I would catch a whiff of envy, as in, why does he get to follow his bliss and not me? I want to be a lion tamer, not an accountant. Then again, maybe, what a chump. He'll never parlay this stupid dream into a chain of supermarkets. But I knew that going in. And yet another possibility might be, in other words, I wonder if he even watches football. Shoe by Jeff McNelly. Cosmo asks, I wonder what's on the wasteland this afternoon. And a football pops out of the TV. Shoe comes in and asks, what are you watching now? It's the only thing on besides football. It's the Sunday sports extravaganza with the world's strongest person contest. Here comes the harpsichord carry. The what? Well, this is PBS. Well, when it comes to harpsichords, authenticity is the elephant in the room. The harpsichord started out its revival as more authentic than the piano, at least for certain kinds of music like Bach. And from there, things quickly got out of hand. One strong association is with the harpsichord is as a window into the past. One problem is that seeing through that window seems to depend on who cleaned it last and the area to which they chose to pay attention. And sometimes the window has even been able to do double duty as a funhouse mirror. Is the exercise only to hear something as it might have sounded? Should we be content only to cover a single data point, or do we want more? Do we want to know what the hearing of that sound would have meant to them? Do we wish to have an authentic, out-of-our-period experience? And should we care about authenticity? Did they? After all, the old guys would take an instrument just like that and turn it into this. Now, the difference is not easily seen. The size and shape are the same, but the range of the instrument has been expanded to be more useful for later music by putting in a new keyboard with more keys, 51 keys rather than 45, and that meant rearranging the strings, and that changed the sound. And even then, as antiques, these things were prized for their sound. Nor would they have been above turning one of these into this. This instrument started life out in 1646 as the same small instrument of 45 notes as I have here tonight, and achieved its final expansion in 1780. It had 2 keyboards, 61 notes on each of the keyboards, and it was nearly 8 feet long rather than just barely 6. To put this into somewhat more contemporary terms, consider the difference between this 1928 Ford Coupe, nicely restored with antique plates, and this repurposing of the same model. Or this. The instrument I have here tonight is my best attempt to return the design as we received it to its original configuration. It's a close copy, but it's not a forgery. I have expended no effort to make it look or sound old. In 1640, when its original was built, it would have looked and sounded new, and that's exactly what I wanted. Does it sound exactly like the original? That's impossible to tell, but there's always sample variance. I can feel certain, though, that it hews very close to type. As far as authenticity goes, I have no doubt that a physical object is able to approach some state of faithfulness to an original more closely than the human experience of that object ever can. The coexistence of antiques with forgeries proves this. Whether it is an antique or a facsimile, a forgery or not, we humans must react to any object of any other time as creatures of our own time. An object might seem primitive and unsatisfactory transposed into our current surroundings. So, why bother? Once we've seen the city, can we bear staying on the farm? The counter-argument is that having to deal with the constraints experienced by the people living back then can be a prod to our greater understanding now. That instrument rewards me when playing music of its milieu, but it can set obstacles for other music. Now, if each of you were given a chance to drive the restored 1928 Ford Coupe, what broader understanding of its time would you have gained? Would you have driven on a 1928 paved or unpaved surface, stopped at a 1928 gas station, traded 1928 chit-chat, changed a 1928 tire, traveled in a 1928 landscape, all the while wearing 1928 clothes, worrying about 1928 politics, and thinking 1928 thoughts of how much progress we have achieved here in 1928? Would you have been able to entirely forget now? More to the point, would you have been able to keep up on the interstate? Different people will draw different conclusions from the same experience. I had the opportunity to work on a lovely late 18th century piano and found it exciting and instructive to listen to how the music's effect changed on this older, less developed and lighter sound. I wanted to share the insight, so I invited the then pianist in residence at Dartmouth, Gabriel Chodos, to come over and experience the instrument. He came over and played the instrument for maybe a half an hour, got up, excused himself quite graciously, and as he left the house, as he went out the door, he sort of looked at me sideways and let me know that I'm glad we have Steinways. It's not easy being different. But short of time travel, simply sounding convincing may be what we have to settle for. Like it or not, We're stuck here in this neighborhood of the space-time continuum just as they were stuck in theirs. And in 20 years, think about it, what will convincing sound like then? We're also stuck being human. But that's what makes it so tempting to speculate beyond the data, is that they were human too. It's okay to want to understand our differences and our similarities. Now, let's say you had a yen to own a harpsichord. When dealing with any class of object, you have to make choices. You have to belong, it comes with the territory. One is bound to be aligned with one camp or another, and belonging to the non-aligned group is still belonging. For types of instruments based on classical models, there are three prominent axes. You can consider the nationality, its period, or its complexity. For nationality, we have French, Italian, German, English, and Flemish schools, so-called. But national styles break down further into city or regional styles. Like languages, they are fluid across the face of the earth. For period, you could have the choice of 16th century, 17th century, or 18th century instruments. Then you have first half of the whatever century, second half, but then it breaks down into quarters quite nicely, and even down to generations. There are generational differences between harpsichords to be found. And complexity, you can have one or two keyboards. This has one keyboard, that instrument out there has two. You can have 4 octaves or 5 octaves. This instrument has 4, that instrument has 5. It can have one, you can get 1, 2, or 3 sets of strings. This instrument has 2, that instrument has 3. And you have to also carefully consider whether your purchase will be as a musical instrument or as a fashion statement. And beyond these classical types, there are the further choices of 20th century or hypermodern attempts. Hypermodern I would define as being electronic. 20th century are all the instruments made in the 20th century, and it makes a difference because many of the 20th century compositions for harpsichord list the exact kind of harpsichord it was written for. And there are a multitude of possibilities for ownership, the most likely of which is not to own any. By and large, this is the consensus choice. The least likely is to own one of everything. And then you have to consider instrument makers. Do you go with an instrument maker who makes classical instruments or modern instruments? Do you go to a popular maker, an in maker, or an out maker? The in makers can have much longer wait lists and higher prices. In making your choice, who do you listen to, the cognoscenti or the ignoranti? And which are the real cognoscenti? And who told you? And then we have instrument players. You have established players, and you have young Turks. You have conservative players and radical. We think of them as Olympian or Apollonian or Dionysian. You can simply say, I don't know anything about art, but I know what I like. Well, that's perfectly okay, but it won't satisfy everyone because harpsichordists have groupies. Cope with it. Each of these decisions will be made with some eye to branding. For instance, when I first started, it was the Wild West. One could buy instruments designed and made by old world craftsmen or instruments made by young, variously inexperienced and self-taught countrymen, each of whom claimed to have based his efforts on rigorous research, meticulous workmanship, insight that only he was privy to. The instruments made by old world craftsmen bore no relation to the antique examples and had an unfortunate reputation for falling apart in North American central heating. Much of the American product was not much better sound-wise, but at least some of those instruments were built to survive. Unfortunately so. But in a series of small steps, some others became demonstrably more authentic, one by one, and beauties emerged from hiding. When I got into the racket, one would also be expected to align with some established player. I'm going to consider three of the most prominent harpsichordists of the mid-20th century, who were locked in a market war, mostly, but not entirely, of their own making. First was Wanda Landowska. She was the mother of us all. Landowska became the most prominent of the early players. She was both a revolutionary and a high-minded popularizer. If her brand was anything, it was high art. She's known to walk out to the harpsichord like this. Like her Polish countryman Chopin, she set up shop in France. She started her career before the First World War, but she was Jewish, and she was forced to flee from France to the United States at the beginning of the Second World War. Though she was physically petite, she became the 800-pound gorilla of the instrument. Her shadow spread widely. Next, we consider Rosalind Turek, who managed to get herself a reputation as the high priestess of Bach. Whether this was due to her excellence or her single-mindedness depended upon to whom you spoke. She was American, she was born in Illinois, and she was the daughter of Russian Jews. She was primarily a pianist, but made a mid-century foray into the harpsichord, which earned her the disapprobation of Sylvia Marlowe, the First Lady of the harpsichord. She was also American. She was born in Manhattan, and she was also the daughter of Russian Jews. Full disclosure, she was my teacher. I think she truly loved the instrument as much as the music. She was committed enough to scare up the money to commission many works by contemporary composers. She also felt free to take the harpsichord out of its comfort zone on occasion. At the core of the harpsichord literature, but in fact the whole literature, is Johann Sebastian Bach. Like most musicians, all harpsichordists suffer to some extent from some form of Bach on the brain. This is a well-known quote, and it's possibly apocryphal, but it's much too good to disregard. It sums up the personality clashes of the time perfectly, no matter who said it or didn't, to whom. It's also a perfect example of insight that only the speaker is privy to. It's also heavily ironic, since no one could come close to the stated ideal with the instruments at hand. All of these considerations would be in the back of my mind when answering even cocktail party questions, since the factionalism is so intense and the stakes are so low that almost anything I might say could be open to challenge. I told you not to mention any other harpsichordists in front of him. But speaking of cocktail parties, let's return to our conversation. I believe you were just to ask when harpsichords were first invented. Well, we don't know, but the evidence suggests sometime in the late 1300s. Before that, two necessary components were missing from the available technology: the concept of the escapement and the ability to produce metal wire of adequate consistency and tensile strength for strings. You might be tempted to think of the invention of the harpsichord as a marriage made in heaven. Why should we care? Because harps have strings and organs have keys. That's why. Perhaps there is some angel in back pumping, just like the organ player's wife. Even down-to-earth folk can get in on this. Notice the organ player is using both hands to play, but it still takes two to tango. Harpsichords don't need pumping. For harpsichords, there is an event horizon roughly 60 years before this print. Henri Arnaud de Sevilla lived from about 1400 to 1466, and he served as physician, astrologer, and general man about the castle to Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. For Philip, he collected and copied many manuscripts. Among these, there is one that may be his own work, which contains the earliest unambiguous written record of a harpsichord. It's called clavicimbalum, which translates as keyed cimbalum. Cimbalum is psaltery, clave is key. Although the manuscript describes it in another form than the one I'm showing, the mechanical innovation that makes possible a mechanism to pluck strings is a means of allowing the plectrum, the plucker or pick, having plucked once, to return past the string and reset itself for subsequent plucks. In other words, an escapement. This is something the finger does effortlessly. It doesn't stroke back and forth with the string, plucking each time. Pick, 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 pick. This is the back of the jack. The tongue, the small white piece running upper left to lower right, is free to rotate on its axle, the pin. The part of the tongue at upper left will contact the jack in such a way that with the addition of the return spring, the tongue is held in position, ready to pluck. Here's the jack at rest with the plectrum under the string. The jack has risen, the plectrum is engaged with the string. Notice the rise of the jack and the deflection of the plectrum. I'll go back to number 1. And now at the top of the travel, the plectrum is free of the string. The string has been plucked. The damper is away from the string, allowing the string to vibrate freely. On its way back down, here's the tongue escaping. Notice the sliver of tongue apparent at the right side of the jack. The damper is about to contact the string and silence it. And this, from about 1480, is probably, or perhaps, the oldest extant harpsichord. The Arnaud drawing is on the right. It's nearly the spitting image of each. They're nearly the spitting image of each other. And this suggests the distinct possibility then, rather than producing a thought piece that later came into being, whoever drew the manuscript drew from life. Note also the very strong similarity to the small portative organs in the earlier iconography. The concept of the hand organ is not so primitive and screwy. It has come down to us in the accordion, concertina, and Hohner melodica. Still, one does not need to pump a harpsichord like this, and there are enough keys to play with two hands. From 40 years later, this is the oldest dated harpsichord, if you choose to believe the dates. Note the similarity of the shape, especially the curve. The only new thing about the harpsichord is its mechanical nature, which it shares with organs and clocks. Organs have keys, clocks have escapements. Everything else about its musical nature was already well known. The lute and the psaltery have strings parallel to the soundboard. The harp and the psaltery, each and every note has its own string, and the strings are laid out in a graduated pattern. The basis of the graduated pattern would have been easily discovered on a lute-like instrument. And at this time, the major figure credited with explaining the physics of music was Pythagoras of Samos. As the legend goes, when visiting a forge, Pythagoras noticed differences of pitch given by the unchanging anvil based on the weight of the hammerhead hitting it. This led him to investigate the ratios between pitches, as well as some other musical magic that we won't pursue now. For the purposes of stringed instruments, the maker needs to know that to produce a pitch elevated by 1 octave, the sounding length of a string must be cut in half. This is a geometric progression and is the basis of the familiar curved shape of both the harp and the harpsichord. And then you ask, are harpsichords kind of like old pianos? And they are the predecessors of the piano. The first piano was actually called gravicembalo, called forte e piano, harpsichord with loud and soft. They are quite distinct in their means of producing sound, leading one wag to pronounce. Strings are for plucking, drums are for hitting. Irving was the first of his harpsichord, was the foreman of the first harpsichord shop I worked in. He had been the first on his block to build a harpsichord kit, and for 1965, he was more of an expert than most. He had happily left his career as a window dresser and stylist for a department store in Worcester to work in harpsichords, and he retired to Miami Beach, Worcester accent and all. Now, these questions, I think, are either meant to help establish my appetite for punishment or how complex the project is. And the answer is, it depends. And the variable is complexity. Now, perhaps these questions are meant to determine just how unique or crazy I really am. My normal glib answer is, too many. When pressed, though, my best guess for the present moment is no more than 100 serious professional level makers, resulting in an annual output of perhaps twice whatever that number actually may be, worldwide. A colleague once observed, our stiffest competition is ourselves 30 years ago. No doubt this is asked because harpsichord kits have entered the general lore. A lot of people know someone who knows someone who knows someone who has assembled a kit. Quite possibly they can't imagine meeting anyone idiotic or accomplished enough to make something so arcane from scratch. The more musically knowledgeable interlocutor might wish to determine whether I am merely a poseur or I know what I'm talking about. But now I chuckle because I can play the ace up my sleeve. Now, this is asked thinking no doubt something like, am I missing something here? Who would want such a thing? Or, oh yeah, sure, and there are Martians walking amongst us too. Well, at the very least, there's enough of a market to keep folks like me busy repairing all those 30-year-old instruments. Harpsichords were always luxury domestic goods and connoted refinement. No doubt some of them were fashion statements rather than musical instruments, but they were also associated with the education of young women in prosperous families. Musicability was seen as equal to accomplishment, and this was agreed to enhance marriageability. This seems refined and restrained, but he's playing a different kind of flute, and there's a violin at his elbow. Violin, wine, is he a lowlife? Wouldn't you love to be able to read the paper she's holding out to him? Are those her terms? The harpsichord here is incidental. The moment with the King Charles is the subject. Note her body language. From the evidence of the putti, these girls belong to some serious wealth. Putti are like boats. If you need to ask, you can't afford them. All that fluttering about has put the music in disarray as well. But the drawing room milieu had room for other folksier instruments. For instance, The citern was comfortable in places ranging from barber shops to elegant drawing rooms. It was one of the few guitar-like instruments using metal strings, just like the harpsichord. It had 4 courses and a reentrant tuning. In essence, it was the ukulele of its day. Here's an even folksier instrument, the rommelpot. This was not a drawing room instrument. Note the average age and stature of all those wearing the smiles. The rommelpot demonstrates another point on the continuum between the sublime and the otherwise. I think we would be sorely mistaken to believe that naive folksiness equates with artlessness. These are probably the artist's children, and all the objects maybe came out of his props closet. To the left is the violin, and yes, that's how it would have been played. In the center, she's playing spoons on the helmet. She's wearing the collar that goes with the helmet. And at the right, you have the rommelpot. Violins had both upper and lower class associations at the time. 15 years later, the knee is still bare. It's both fun and a bit sad to speculate whether the same 3 kids grown up are in this painting too. Well, then there's this question. We use hardwoods and softwoods sourced from specialty dealers. Home Depot is not a source. Some parts need to be hard and heavy, some are better light. For each component, the choice of species is made on the basis of the desired qualities. 8 to 10 different species in an instrument would not be untypical. The soundboard is made of a softwood, generally spruce. It's chosen from straight, stable boards with the correct grain structure. And it's planed to be about 1/8 of an inch thick, 3.3 for those of you who think in metric. Actually, it takes more than one forest. The go bar deck is a fixture in just about every harpsichord maker's shop. It consists of 2 parallel and opposing tables. One is supported by the floor, and the other one is somehow held near the ceiling, upside down. It allows the even distribution of force over large areas in nearly any configuration. It allows one to place many relatively weak clamps in a short period of time. Here, gluing on the bridge, and the go bars did the little bridge too beforehand. No harpsichord maker would be without one. A pianist would immediately recognize all these keys, but a pianist might have a hard time with the scant number, there are only 49 here, and small size. A pianist might rather have the 5 octaves and longer keys this design offers. Actually, you can play most of early and middle Haydn, early Mozart, and very early Beethoven on this range. As you probably noticed from the last 2 examples, the white and black motif of the keyboard continued, but access to materials changed. On the right, in the 17th century, the white keys would be cowbone, and the black keys would be bog oak, which are both local European materials. In the 18th century, on the left, the white keys are ivory, and the black keys are ebony. And these are imported tropical materials, so a way in which harpsichords get involved in empire building. Here we have boxwood naturals, which are kind of yellow or light. Over time, they go to a lovely milk chocolate brown, stained hardwood sharps. But you may be asking whether the keys are not supposed to be white and black, but no, that's too boring. Here we have ebony naturals with bone-capped stained hardwood sharps. But wait, that's not all. Here's tortoiseshell on early 18th century German harpsichord. Nor are other precious materials unheard of. Well, it's a development. This is a Flemish-style mother and child virginals. The little child, which is sitting on top, sounds an octave higher. The child is stowed in the marsupial pouch to the left when not riding on top. Then we get to harpsichords. You have two manuals, but this is the early 17th century style. Do you see the inconsistency? The keyboards are not aligned by pitch. The upper keyboard, the one to the left, plays at normal pitch, just like that instrument. The lower keyboard to the right transposes a fifth down. It's useful for when your partner can't do the transposition, I suppose. But the final and enduring reason for two-beat keyboards can be summed up in two words: volume and timbre. Besides, that's what the organ can do. You can go from soft to loud, loud against soft, soft against loud. You can have an accompaniment and a melody. And that could be achieved in this way. This instrument has been arranged to have more strings, but the keyboards are aligned and allow playing with different timbres and volumes. It's the style called a petit reveillement, and it's the late 17th century. Also, notice the black naturals. Well, the answer to that is yes. That's how I ended up making them. Well, the answer to this is there's at least a lifetime supply, but still much less than has ever existed. And what do I mean by that? Well, there are several broad categories. Before it became affordable to print and publish, music was distributed by copying, which is slow and takes a lot of time, and therefore you have to pay the person who does the copying a good deal of money. With written music hard to come by, improvisation was an important skill that would give someone access to a lifetime supply of new music. As a rule, though, improvisations were never written down. So right there is a loss of a great deal of music. We know little more about music making then than we would about the rise of jazz and rock and roll if all recordings were to disappear instantaneously. What we do know comes from recordings, each of which serves to fix a unique performance in time, but there's no single version of a tune. One person's 8-bar blues may be totally unlike some others. And what one group playing the same piece sounded like in another room, in another city, on another day, is unknown. Remember, we can be talking about significant numbers of different notes, harmonies, and accents occurring every time a piece was played. We have no idea which performance any of them would have thought was definitive, even if they could bring themselves to think in such terms. Delight is in the search. Another group in the next room could jam on the same tune to very different effect. I think we can truthfully say that, like jazz, there is more music for the harpsichord lost than preserved. The personal keyboard books of the time usually contained relatively few pieces, mostly popular tunes of the day and simply set. Normally, there would be no more than one could play in an hour or two, let alone a life's worth. Likely, that written music was seen as didactic and aspirational. This is how it's done. Now, go forth and roll your own. Improvise. It's all jazz from here. The pieces were usually copied into the books by the student or teacher. Hymn settings were common. Perhaps this lady is playing one such. I'm going to move over there and play a setting of How Brightly Shines the Morning Star from one of these personal collections. Note when I play the melody in the right hand with written-in trills and the simple block chords in the left. If you know the hymn well, you'll also notice some inconsistencies in the rhythm. So here goes. Or perhaps she's playing a popular song. This is De Mai from the notebook of Anna Maria van Eyl. It's about 60 years later. Note the much more elegant three-part writing being freely distributed between the hands. Academic forms, or what David Letterman might have called stupid music tricks. Still, some of the great works for harpsichord belong to this genre. The Art of the Fugue, the Well-Tempered Clavier, and the Goldberg Variations by J.S. Bach, to name three. Speaking of whom, once again, here's the man himself showing us a piece of paper. Canon triplex, a sex voce. On the piece of paper is a canon of his, a sign of his facility with music and his learnedness. But you say there are only 3 lines of music. Well, there are actually 6 clefs, 2 at the beginning of each line. Each line is a mirror canon. The question is how they fit together. So one line is da, 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 da. This is ba, 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 ba. And, just plain old mirror canon at a fifth. So, it's not great music, but it's not meant to be. It's a puzzle, but not one that just anybody could devise. I'll illustrate this genre with a fantasy by Jan Petersson Svelink, perhaps written around 1610 or so. It's found in the same manuscript that contained the hymn. It's a two-voiced canon. It's not a strict canon, there's no inversion, but see if you can hear the left hand imitating the right hand all the way through, but at different removes of time and pitch. Unlike the hymn setting, this is not particularly simple music. It was frankly surprising to find it in the book. And it demands equality and independence of the hands playing it. Now we come to the bugbear of all instrumentalists. Virtuosity comes in many forms, and each is suited to its time. I will play a late keyboard setting of one of the most famous pieces of the first half of the 17th century. The piece is the Lacrimae Antiquae Pavan of John Dowland, which was published in London in 1605. The setting, which is dated 1642, at least the book in which the setting appears, is by Melchior Schilt, who spent 2 or 3 years, at about the time that that fantasy may have been written, studying with Svelink. The skill here is displayed not only in the technical devices that are difficult for the player, especially in conditions like this, who thus gets to display his or her own virtuosity, but in using compositional devices like canon and imitation in varied, interesting, and nearly transparent ways. The virtue is in not being noticed. And not least, there is the creativity evidenced in the variations themselves. This is professional music, and it's written in German keyboard tablature. Feel free to follow along. for me, this piece also fits perfectly into the category of music about reflection. It is one of those pieces I will sit down and play whenever I wish to be in contact with meaning and beauty, and it's due in equal measure to both Dowland and Schilt. And what if the present company is up for a jam session or a sing-along? The harpsichord was seldom excluded. Those that can, sing, and those that can't or won't, play. Lute, harpsichord, and voice. Notice the cittern. Notice the viola da gamba. Those that neither sing nor play, listen, or not, as the case may be. Lute, harpsichord, and voice. Notice the viola da gamba. Music? Music? We don't need no stinking music. Well, except maybe for the pipsqueak. Perhaps they're playing a well-known hymn, or perhaps they're just posing. Lute, harpsichord, violin, viola da gamba, or cello. Italy was where one traveled to study music. Public concerts, as we know them, hadn't yet been devised. If it weren't for the jug and the floral display passing through the background, I'd be thinking church. But perhaps they're rehearsing or performing for a wedding. There are 4 singers, a cornetto, a double bass, and a harpsichord. It's pretty clear these folks aren't a family group, but rather belong to that class of skilled servants known as musicians. They're pros. Note the gender of the harpsichordist. That's the first male you've seen all night. They're clearly not jamming. There are at least 4 part books and 2 pairs of spectacles being used. Parthenia in Violata was one of the earliest volumes to be printed in England, possibly in 1625. The first one was Parthenia, just straight Parthenia, but that was just for the harpsichord. It exists in only 1 copy at the New York Public Library, and its origin is a mystery. Research by Thurston Dart has led him to this plausible explanation. The collection was first printed as a special presentation to Prince Charles, not yet King Charles I, who played both the virginals and the viol. He preferred the latter, and his new queen, Henrietta Maria of France, who played the virginals on the occasion of their marriage. Dart further suggests that after the presentation copies were struck, the plates were repurposed for public sale. This serves to explain both the sentiment of the verse. The scansion doesn't work. Don't worry about the scansion. Just read the words. As well as the distinctively different style of engraving of the publisher's advertisement at the bottom of the plate. Mylan and I will play the 4th and 5th pieces, New Naughty and Old Naughty. Which? Which? That was new naughty. Now you get to hear old naughty. Well, as you could hear, the harpsichord does most of the work in this music, but this is not typical for the time. More usually, the harpsichord would be the accompanist. Next, Mylène and I will play two sections of a larger piece entitled La Poitevine, The Woman of Poitou, by Marin Marais. You may have encountered this character watching the 1991 film Tous les matins du monde. The music in the top panel is the viol part of the first section we'll play. The music on the bottom is for the accompanist. That's me. What you see here are two fairly equal workloads. I am given the bass line for my left hand, garnished with numbers to tell me what harmonies my right hand should supply and when. It's left up to me to choose, in other words, improvise, the disposition of notes that I think will best display the virtues of my collaborator as well as the music. I can do chords or a counter melody. If I'm not quite making up the right hand as I go along, nevertheless, my accompaniment will reflect my style and differ from that of other players. The second piece is written in imitation of a musette. Musettes were a sort of soft bagpipe with a bellows. This means that there are no unsightly puffing cheeks to be seen. It's a folksy instrument, but quite drawing room friendly. Since it's supposed to evoke bagpipe music, the bass part, my part, is largely a drone. This is the viol part. Not only are there very many more notes, but if you look closely, you will see a lot of signs, numbers, and instructions that are not given to the accompanist. This is the composer's attempt to very carefully transmit details of interpretation and technique that are already not easily conveyed by word, even in the same room, let alone across 3 centuries. Harpsichords are historical instruments, and sometimes they're present as history is made. Landowska may look the languid beauty in this photo, but she was all grit. When recording a sonata by Scarlatti in March 1940 near Paris, some anti-aircraft fire intruded. She continued on unperturbed. These were single takes onto disc masters. No splicing was possible. But the harpsichord can also climb down from its pedestal and do the old soft shoe in the service of period, atmosphere. Who, as any devotee of Dorothy Sayers knows, played Bach not on the harpsichord but the piano. Oh well. Two media appearances by the harpsichord that you may know are the soundtrack of the 1953 animated short of James Thurber's A Unicorn in the Garden, and the Oscar-winning soundtrack from the 1963 film by Tony Richardson, Tom Jones. The harpsichord can also go slumming and be put into the service of just plain fun. A good friend collects mid-20th century harpsichord iconography, including pop recordings that feature or utilize the harpsichord. I've taken a lot of this sort of visual material she has collected, record labels and album covers, and put it together with a recording in the genre by my teacher, Sylvia Marlowe. If it works, no guarantees, it's a harpsichord cover of Meade Lux Lewis's Honky Tonk Train Blues. I'll show credits for the artworks that I dragooned into service in order of appearance. For many, myself included, Elizabeth Claude Jacquet de la Guerre is harpsichord royalty. She was one of the very best composers for the instrument, regardless of gender or era. But the response of telling someone I make harpsichords that I most appreciate is, let's play. Now, for me, over a half century later, making harpsichords still seems to have been a good idea. May I tell you how much I have appreciated this opportunity to supply prepared answers to questions you probably never knew you had. It's been a lovely party. Thank you so much for inviting me. Please feel free to return to the real-world subjects of dogs, gardens, and kids. Thank you so much.
So if you still have questions, not about those three topics.
I can't imagine you not knowing everything you need to know about the harpsichord forever and ever and ever. But
We'll indulge a couple minutes if folks have questions for Hendrik. Please wait till I come to you with the mic.
Hendrik, I know you come from a fairly musical family, and I wonder what influence they may have had on your choice of landing, as it were, on the harpsichord. Did that have was there any familial influence on that, or was this entirely otherwise motivated?
well, if my father was a professional musician. He had started out life as a violinist and pianist in Holland, but came here in the 20s sometimes because he was dissatisfied with professional prospects going up the ladder in the Netherlands. He then became a composer and conductor, and that's how he made his money. If it had been up to him, the harpsichord would have been a no-no. For me, the experience that got me was after he died. He died 10 days before I turned 13. We had a good friend who worked for Vanguard Records, who would come and visit my mother after my father died, and bring me, 5 or 6 relatively recent releases that she thought were good. She had been a professional pianist, and she knew the family because she had been a mentee of my father's. And there was a recording of the Haydn Harpsichord Concerto. And like most people then, I had heard the description of harpsichord as something you can do, imitate by placing knives and forks on the strings of a piano, or in Sir Thomas Beecham's immortal description of harpsichord sound, two skeletons copulating on a tin roof. But I found the sound interesting, but even more interesting, I was drawn by how it was done. And I actually worked out the mechanism. And then I went on with the rest of my life for several years until I fell down this particular rabbit hole. I don't know why. Part of it, I think, may be that my father, being a professional, he denied me music lessons until I was 10, when he felt they could do no harm. So I was starting from a deficit, and of course, harpsichord has the rep of the music being easier than a piano, but it's just as difficult. People have tended to do composition and playing out at the edges of human possibility, since time immemorial. It's just that people have discovered new, easier ways of doing what seem like more difficult things.
I would like to thank you for a wonderful evening, entertainment-wise.
Thank you. Could you
educational-wise.
speak a little louder?
I said I would like to thank you for a wonderful evening of entertainment and knowledge that you've given us. But I do have a question regarding the instrument. How often do you have to tune it versus a piano?
That's a good question, and it's a vexed question. If I want to sit down and play, it is quite astounding the amount of out-of-tuneness I can stand. Being the lazy son of a bitch I am. But this instrument has been tuned about once every weather change. Within a weather change, they're very stable. So it was in an air-conditioned room until 5 o'clock this afternoon. It then got put in a car, brought here. This is hardly as dry as our music room is. Half hour after I brought it in, I tuned it where it stood. I'm told it was a little flat. But it would have been listenable. You would have probably not heard too much out of tuneness, even if I had played it then in that state. But I touched it up and tried to get what I wanted out of it. I'll get you next.
I have 2 questions.
I will direct the microphone to you next.
You haven't talked as much about your personal experience of making the harpsichord, so I just thought I'd ask a question about it. When you make the harpsichord, I'm imagining that the exciting part is when you put the strings on it. Is that your most favorite part of making the instrument?
Well, as far as putting the strings on, if you've had kids, remember their first words and how meaningful they were to you. That's putting the strings on. And getting the kids to their first words is about as heavy a workload and tedious as getting the harpsichord to the point of putting strings on.
Do you work alone, or do you have a shop with other people helping you?
I'm sorry?
Do you work alone, or do you have a shop with other people? And how many people do you have working with you if you do? And secondly, did you bring that by yourself in your car without somebody else putting it in the car?
Yes. The answer to the second question, did I bring it alone? The answer is yes. Wheels are wonderful, and the prime directive is never. One person should never lift both ends at the same time. And as for people, Steve, there will be another one here. I have worked alone. I'm currently working alone, and I have also had 20 people to deal with. Unfortunately, things didn't get set up soon enough, but one of the photographs in the introductory loop was of the side of the cotton picker building with all of the company looking out. And we're about, at its greatest number, it was about 20, then went down to about 14, I think, and then we had a Black Thursday, and then we were 8, I think. So we've, the company allowed the market to dictate how large we were going to be. So instead of doing less with more, we always chose to do more with less.
And if it's a choice of whatever temperament you're, are these equal temperament instruments, equally tempered, or are they, does the choice of temperament have any influence on the design and build of the instrument?
No. The design is, there's one way back there. The design is fairly agnostic about temperament. The differences are so slight in the harpsichord. The differences are so slight that they can be accommodated in order to put a different temperament on. The temperament here tonight was fifth comma mean tone, but accommodated so that I had a semi-serviceable both D sharp and E flat.
Hi there. You spoke a little bit early on about the development of innovations in the harpsichord, so extra manuals, extra range, and so on and so forth. Are contemporary harpsichord makers, the 100 or so that you reckon exist professionally, are they interested primarily in recreating models of the past, or are there further innovations to be had in the instrument with pedals or what have you?
I think well, I'm certain that the current consensus is that the classical instrument is where the money is. That's certainly what people buy. If people wanted to buy something else, there'd be someone who wanted to make it for them. There was an experiment in the 30s done by Arnold Dolmetsch to invent a new jack that would allow a touch-sensitive plucked instrument. I think it worked, but it was so fiddly as to be almost useless in practice.
I built kit number 2034. I picked it up from that building back there in 1983. And I want to thank you for the life that has given to me since then.
I am delighted. I'm gobsmacked. Thank you for telling me that.
Question: how many kits were built? Were the different types of kits? Did they have separate numbering?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that was 2034 French.
Yeah. That series, I don't have I'm not Don Angle, I don't have the numbers in my brain. That series went out to about, I think, 2,300. Others hardly broke 200. Some of them got up around 300-400. So in all, I would estimate that we sold possibly 3,000 kits in the, well, no, more, 3,500 or 4,000 kits within the lifetime of the company. But how many of them got finished? When I came back to the company in 1979, either that year or the next year, we got a letter from a friend of the Hubbards saying that he'd just finished his kit. We were selling kit numbers above 1685 at that point. That's when the design change happened. It's easy to remember because it's Bach's birthday, Handel's birthday, and Scarlatti's birthday. But his kit was kit number 2. And he didn't finish it. Someone else finished it for him.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Hendrik.
There's one more. We'll take this one.
Can you say something about your relationship with Frank Hubbard and what he was like, and were there stages to your relationship?
Surely. Frank Hubbard was the ideal of everyone who worked in his shop. He was the acknowledged authority on the instrument. He was a very helpful person when he wasn't undercutting you. which wasn't all the time. The undercutting part, mostly he was helpful. He was fun to be around. I could tell you, I'll tell you 2 stories. He stood about this high, but he was a real spark plug. At the time, he had a Fiat station wagon. Do you remember that? Yeah. Which he described as being powered by a sewing machine motor. Well, he and I, he had some errand to do down south, south of Massachusetts, and it meant getting on what was then only Route 128. He drove. I was convinced I was going to die that day. Here's this courtly man, just the epitome of kindness and oh yes, of course, do it this way. Behind the wheel, he was hell. He told me that day that he was reluctant to let his wife drive because of the nagging fear that someone might get ahead of them. And that was the day I learned the hack of. He drove in the last lane, the fast lane, in this Fiat, surrounded by American boats, kind of wallowing around, and that was the day I learned the hack of turning onto the median when the brakes weren't good enough. I really did think I was going to die that day. And one other story. Which one shall I tell? Oh, it's too good. When I first worked there, he was the whole company was in the carriage house at the Lyman Estate, which is a lovely old building, has no insulation of any sort. So whatever is happening in the shop is evident to everybody anywhere else in the building. So on this particular day, one of our cabinet makers, who Frank and Bill hired directly out of North Bennett Street School, who was also totally deaf and had been from childhood, was using the thickness planer and dressing wood. And these are loud machines, and the knives weren't kept particularly sharp, so not only did you have the machine noise, you had the noise of dull knives trying to cut wood. And usually, when they're idling, they're at a drone. And with the first introduction of wood, you'll hear a slight lowering of pitch. Well, today it went, and you could hear the electric motor straining. But the guy was deaf. He wasn't looking, so he didn't know what was going on. Frank and I and a bunch of other people were clustered at the top of the stairs, which were, 18th or 19th century stairs, precipitous. And we all heard this happen. And Frank bolted down the stairs, crying as he went, "Fuck me blind, that man is going to be the death of me." So, happy? Thank you very much.